Hey everyone, it's me, Gingerino, the host of the podcast. This little mini episode is a speculative episode, a theory I have about something that we've learned recently. As well, it contains major spoilers for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, so if that's something that you don't want to have ruined for you, you're going to want to tune out of this episode. I'll give a marker later in the episode as to when the major spoilers are going to occur, so you'll have that warning of when you want to tune out if you want to listen to part of today's episode. But be warned, there are major spoilers contained within this episode. I'm just doing this little mini-sode because there was a part that I wanted to include in the last episode that has to do with the reveal trailer that I learned after recording. When I started recording this piece to add it in, it started adding up to be a lot of time, and since the episode was already a bit long, I figured I'm going to do this as a separate piece, as well because it offers a lot of speculation as to something important about the setting and time of the game of Avowed. If you've listened to the previous episode, I went through the reveal trailer, I know on an audio format, how crazy of me, and I was describing things that we were seeing and how it was important to the lore of the world and how we can maybe infer some things from it as to what Avowed might be like. Now there is one piece of information I forgot to include because I learned it afterwards. And that has to do with a part where the arrows are flying through the air, and when they're at their apex, you can see just a little bit in the background, two moons. This was pointed out on Reddit by, the name escapes me right now, but someone posted on Reddit with a rather confusing picture of them trying to decipher what was going on. It was still a great post. And I'm really glad for it because he pointed out that there are in fact two moons. I went to YouTube, looked up the reveal trailer to confirm that it wasn't somebody somewhere else just playing a hoax. And yeah, sure enough, if you pay attention and you look at it frame by frame, you can see there are two moons in the background when the arrow is flying through the clouds and mist. Now, why is this important and worth an episode all on its own? The first thing, of course, is that does Aora have two moons? The answer to that question is yes, Aora has two moons. And so if you are watching the reveal trailer for the first time, let's say back in July of 2020, if you happen to notice the symbol on the banner and you happen to notice the two moons in the sky, you got all these little hints of the world that we're playing in. You didn't have to go online to find out this is being played in Aora. You had just enough hints to think, oh, wow, is this actually happening? So that is part of why I think those two moons are there, is just to give a little hint to the really detailed viewer of where we're playing in. But it also gives a really large hint to something else. So in the lore for Pillars of Eternity, there are two moons that we can read about from books in the game. One of the moons are called Sen Balafa, which stands for Andra's Beloved. This is the bigger moon that you can see with the naked eye. There is a second moon that we can read about called Kalda Deb. I can't remember how to pronounce it. It's translated as Black Runner. Now, the really important thing that we need to note about this second smaller moon, Kaldwa, is that it is very, very small. When I say very small, I mean it's not really visible to the naked eye. So here's something that we know from the history of Aora. When these two moons have their orbits coincide, it causes a natural phenomenon in the world known as a lover's tide. A lover's tide is such a catastrophic event that it goes down in history books. In fact, I believe a lover's tide is responsible for, in part, the destruction of Old Valia, or at least a capital city of that empire. As well, in the history of the Dyrwood, which is the continent we play the first Pillars of Eternity game in the history of it, there was a war that went on where the nation of Dyrwood were fighting against their mother nation of Adir for independence. And one of the cruxes of that war is that a lover's tide was about to occur, and the natives of the Dyrwood knew this ahead of time and told their allies within the Dyrwood colonies themselves about it. And so they were able to plan ahead of time and use that tactical advantage to actually win the war. So this lover's tide actually got the nation of Dyrwood their independence, if you think about it. As you can imagine, the two moons with their orbits coinciding, it would cause the ocean's tides to just drastically rise and fall, and lots of storms are going to happen on the ocean, which of course is going to affect other things globally as well. So it's a really significant event. I thought at first, you know what we could do? We could use this as a way to map out when Avowed might happen. Because if we're seeing two moons in the reveal trailer, then that would indicate, very likely, that it's around the time of a lover's tide. So you go and you look into the game and you find out that lovers' tides do not occur on a regular basis. Like they don't happen every 50 years. It happens randomly. Like people can't predict how long it'll be to the next one. They don't yet know the mathematics of the orbits yet. So that doesn't help us. But those two lovers' tide events that I did mention, we can look at those and we can say, do either of those match with where Avowed might be? And the answer to the second one especially is very, very plausible. During the War of Defiance, it's consistent with a piece of the leak information that says we're going to be fighting against an incoming threat of tyranny. Specifically the Adir nation fighting to maintain control of its colonies in the Dyrwood. The only downside, though, is that's also not consistent with us playing in the Living Lands. That's a completely different continent altogether. So it might not be that. It could be the first Lover's Tide, which caused global catastrophes around the world, but we don't really know any details about it. But I have a speculative theory that's even more wild than that. And for those of you who have played Pillars of Eternity and are deep into the lore, this might hit you. And you might be like, oh, that would be amazing. So you know what? I'm actually just going to state it for you, what I think this could indicate. I preface this first by saying it depends on how detailed the reveal trailer is. If the developers at Obsidian purposely put 2 moons in there the way they did, not for cinematic effect, and every tiny detail about those moons is consistent with the lore, then we have sufficient ground for saying that Avowed might be taking place during the Engwithan Inquisitions. For those of you who have played Pillars of Eternity, you know that this is a big deal. The Society of the Engwithans are an enigmatic race. They were pioneers of their time, and they had technologies that were far advanced compared to what we see in Pillars of Eternity. And this thriving big society all of a sudden just poof, disappeared. And so now that major spoiler that I was talking about earlier, it comes in here. So if you don't want to have major narrative pieces of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 spoiled for you, tune out now. But for those of you moving forward, this is what we have. So we know that the Engwithans created the gods of Aora, the gods that we see in the game. We know the Engwithans used the science of the soul, the science of essence called animancy, to fabricate these gods. And then they spread this religion across the world as a means to keep people behaving morally, as a way to keep order and control in a world that they viewed would be chaotic if there were not gods. When the Engwithans were performing this inquisition across Aora, at one point, one of the gods which they created, Andra, decided that she was going to wipe out the Engwithan race as a way to keep their secret of where they came from safe. So she took one of the moons out of the sky and flung it down to Aora, where the Engwith's, main city would probably be. Another one of the gods, Abidan, being a deity of preservation, flung himself in front of the moon, trying to destroy it, but himself was killed in the process, at least his physical manifestation. But the interesting thing about that piece of history is that at one point in time, there was another moon in the sky. So that means there were actually at some point 3 moons in the sky. Now, why is this important? Because when we look at the Avowed reveal trailer, we only see 2 moons, right? But remember that little detail I mentioned before? That the smaller moon should not be visible to the naked eye? And yet, when we're looking at it from a flying arrow's vantage point in the reveal trailer, moving very quickly through some fog and mist and cloud as well, we can very clearly see 2 moons. So does this mean that we're playing the game back in a time when there were 2 visible moons in the sky? If that's the case, then we'll be playing around the time of the Engwithan Inquisition. Now, again, I have to say that the 2 moons in the reveal trailer could definitely just be for cinematic and dramatic effect. It might not be a super key detail that they're trying to be consistent with the lore about. But it is worth noting that if they put that detail in there on purpose, which they obviously did, they took the time to render it into the trailer, and it's a very fleeting detail. You only see it for half a second. I didn't even notice it the first time I watched the trailer. You see this, and if you start to think, it's very possible. And you think about the rest of the reveal trailer, it's all consistent with itself. Let's walk through it for a second. In the reveal trailer, we see a symbol for the goddess Woodica. Now, that would indicate that we're definitely playing the game during a time when the contemporary gods were considered gods, or at least they existed. So how would that make sense if these gods were recently created? Well, if the Engwithans are performing this inquisition across Aora, that might be the threat of incoming tyranny that we read out in the leak information. And so we know that the gods of Aora are represented by the ideals of the world, right? So, for example, I mentioned Abaddon earlier on, and he has an ideal of preservation about him. These ideas all came from the Ingwithan people. They essentially sacrificed their own culture and society to create these gods. So the ideals of the Ingwithans became these actual deities. We also know that Boudica is considered the strongest of the gods, which, if you think that through, would indicate that Boudica's values and ideals are actually most in line with the Engwith society. And so if they were going to perform an inquisition going across the globe and they were going to say, well, we got to pick one god to champion, they would probably pick Boudica because that's what most of them align with. So it makes sense that we might see this religious faction that's pushing one god above the rest and trying to give the quote-unquote truth to everyone else out there. They could be the incoming threat of tyranny that we hear about. As well, at the end of the reveal trailer, we have the narrator of the voiceover saying things like, we have to face the sins, or we have to face the monsters that our sins have borne. And this really ties well to the history of the Ingwithans making these gods and coming to terms with them not seeing or knowing or believing that there are any other gods except for the ones they had to make. There's one piece of the reveal trailer that does kind of throw a wrench into this whole thing, but I will offer a couple outs for it because I really like this theory. And that is the sword that we see at the end of the reveal trailer. It has written on it in blue runes the word Oathbinder, and it would be in the Adiran language. So this presents a problem to my theory, because if those runes on the sword spell out Oathbinder in a contemporary language known as Adiran, at least according to what we know now, then that would place it far into the future, closer to when Pillars of Eternity happened. So doesn't that throw a wrench in the idea that it could have been during Ingwithan times? Not quite. That's a good point, and it's certainly reasonable to think that, but it doesn't exclude it. It doesn't say that it can't happen. And let me follow up my reasoning on this, is that the Adiran culture came out of somewhere. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere. And there would likely be a proto-Adiran culture, and they would have their own language and culture and everything about them as well. So the idea that there would be a language and script of Adiran symbols that existed before Adir was actually its own nation is not impossible. There would be tribes of people before Adir became an official nation that will have their own language and script. As well, think about it. If you're just developing this small trailer for the game Avowed coming out, do you as a developer or a creator want to have to recreate an entire language last second to put on a sword when you could just put an existing set of script that perhaps exists in the studio on this sword and also gives a little hint to people who are paying attention? To me, that makes more sense. You wouldn't want to make up a whole new language last second for a reveal trailer. They'll probably have an entire new language or script for Avowed when it comes out if they are playing in different times. But, for the reveal trailer, maybe not so much. And as well, on the sword, we have the word Oathbinder. Now, see, does that throw a wrench into things? Because the Adirans call Boudica, the goddess, calls her Oathbinder. But they call her that far, far into the future of when Engwith were even a thing. And so that would throw a wrench into it, right? But again, not so. What if the title of Oathbinder was given to Boudica from a cultural standpoint? What if the Adirans believed in a system of religion that had Oathbinder as the title of their god, or Oathbinder was a significant part of their culture? Well, the Ingwithans come in, performing their Inquisition, and as a way to assimilate the religions, would apply what Adirans know to what they're trying to get them to believe. This is actually something that our real-world religions have done, like all sorts of religions that have gone to other countries and tried to bring what they believe into other cultures. They have taken the names and ideas of the local culture and applied it to the religious beliefs that they're trying to evangelize. And so the idea that Boudica would be called Oathbinder because Adir already had something sacred to them that they called Oathbinder, and that's just what ended up becoming the main part of the religion when they adopted this new one, that's also possible. So you very well could be playing a proto-Adiran who believed in his own religion and had a deity or something that you were following called Oathbinder, or perhaps that's just a title of person within the Adiran culture itself. It's very possible that all of these things have an excuse for why it could still work. That's my sidestep speculation theory that the two moons in the reveal trailer indicate that we're playing back in a time before Andra took one of the moons out of the sky to destroy the Ingwithans with. And wouldn't it be absolutely cool if we got to witness that historical event? Like if we got to see a god go into the sky and take a moon out to throw it down. Like what kind of story would we be playing in if that's something we got to witness? But more importantly, for a lot of us out there who are into the game, the Ingwithans, having made the gods and having known more about the science of animancy than anybody else in the Pillars games, it makes you think like this is going to answer a lot of the mysteries that we want to have revealed. This is going to answer so many questions about the origins of the gods and the purpose of the wheel and the soul. It's going to, well, hopefully reveal a lot of these unanswered questions. It's going to get us another sneak peek behind the curtain, which will likely give us more questions. We'll look behind the curtain and see a lot of things that we now know and be like, well, but wait, what's that over there? You know, it turns out that something that is akin to the god Remergond already existed. Like, how can that be possible? You know, there could be so many things we just don't know, but I'm excited about it. I kind of hope this is true. As much as I'm wanting to play a little closer to Pillars of Eternity times, and as much as I'm wanting to look at the history of the Aediran culture, if we played into Living Lands close to that, I would really like to see what the Living Lands were like way back when the Engwith were around and they were performing their Inquisition. I mean, even if they're the bad guys, there's a lot of information we could gain from them. And as a person who gets into the lore of a game, I'm very excited, and I really hope this is what it is. But, you know, I'm remaining speculative and skeptical because it's a really, really tiny detail in a reveal trailer, you know, and it hinges upon them having purposely made that decision to give 2 moons visibly and not pay attention to the fact that the small moon isn't supposed to be visible, right? Like it could have very easily been an oversight or just a purposeful decision to have 2 moons there for dramatic effect. Anyways, that's my speculative theory. Let me know what you guys think. You can reach me on Twitter at World of Aora, or you can email me worldofaora@gmail.com. I recorded this episode after I had recorded a few other episodes. In my episodes coming up, I don't include how to reach me on Gmail or anything like that. And that's just because I recorded this one just before recording episode 8. So that's the explanation there. But yeah, anyways, it's been me, Gingerino. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my random ramblings and theories that I have. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you on the next episode.